The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
Let's go! The Chargers looked like they were going to get blown out again, but instead they pulled off the biggest win.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers.
The biggest win of the season.
A colossal statement win for the Chargers after everything looked like it was going to be a continuation of the Bucs game. They turned it around and they beat a winning team, a team that was coming off of a 4-game winning streak. And Daniel, the magic number is down to 1.
It's down to 1, but more importantly, you have faith that maybe this is a team, when they're on, can actually do something in the playoffs. And I think that's the most exciting part. But today's episode is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. David, what can you say? It looked like it was going that same direction, just like the Bucs game, and it ends up like this. Do I do it? Do I do it?
Oh, no.
The Chargers pull off the biggest win of the season, and I get to wear this nice hat that David got me for my birthday and Christmas. And David, coming back from down 11 to answer the call like this team did after having about as rough of start as they could have, what can you say? I mean, easily to me is the best win of the season, and it's just crazy to sit here and think about us talking about this game when we know what the other show could have been like.
And what it felt like it was going to be like. I mean, after that first half of football, it was down 11 points in the third quarter, and then everything snaps and it changes. Score 21 unanswered points to take a lead, and then at the end, put together a 6-play, 90-yard put-away drive to cap it off with a touchdown and absolutely take the Broncos off of life support and secure a massive statement win.
Yeah, they were down 11 multiple times. They were down 21-10. They were down 24-13. And it just didn't matter. That every time you thought that it was kind of getting away from them, they had a big play, and maybe none bigger than one we'll talk about later. Just the weird end of the first half, getting that free kick, 57-yard field goal from Cameron Dicker obviously had a huge part of it. But talk about kind of answering the bell when you had lost back-to-back games. You had lost 3 out of 4 games. And what I talked about earlier in this year is just like, you don't want it coming down to having to win the last 2 weeks against the Raiders and the Patriots to save your season, right? Now you're staying away from that and you're beating the best team that you had left on your schedule. And I think doing it in convincing fashion, right? I mean, the defense couldn't get a stop in the first half and the offense couldn't keep up in the first half. And then you respond to kind of pretty much put together your best full game of the season. And that's why I think it's also a game that restores a little bit of faith in this team. Like, this is a team that we had said, kind of the vibe last week was, yeah, they'll probably make the playoffs and then what, right? Yeah. Like, you have no confidence going in there that you're going to actually be able to do anything, but to answer the questions that they have in this game, right? Like, can you come back from a deficit? Can you play a complete game? Can you go out there and get the game, go ahead touchdown when you need it? And not only that, once you have the lead, can you go put that game away? Like, they answered so many different questions that we had about this team where I wasn't sure what they would have to do for me to get some of that faith back. And I mean, obviously, as you saw in that first half, they're a flawed team that still has plenty of things to work on.
Yeah.
But I don't think it could have gone much differently than this, David, and still have me come away as optimistic and positive as I'm feeling right now.
I mean, hey, they were put in unbelievable peril. They were in a position where they really had to dig themselves out of the grave, right? They already had 1 foot and 1 arm in the grave. After that first half, it was ugly. Like, the Broncos had their way with the Chargers. Like, they did whatever they wanted. They ran the ball extremely well in the first quarter, and they dominated the time of possession. And the Chargers couldn't get anything going. They couldn't get any stops on defense, could not get any momentum. Offensively, they did okay. They were able to score a couple of touchdowns, which was great. But the fact that they were able to come back from being down that far after things look so bleak, that shows their resilience. That shows their ability to get down and just say, screw it. I'm going to go for broke. I'm going to go get back in this game. They score the points. They get the stops in the second half, and they go get the biggest win of the season against a winning opponent, which they had only done one other time this season. Of course, coincidentally, that was also against the Denver Broncos.
But it did feel like this was a different Broncos team, and we talked about it this
Coming
week.
off a 4-game winning streak.
Week feels a lot better than it did the first time around. And I mean, that time, it came down to an onside kick. This time it comes down to an onside kick, but you feel a lot better about how it all went down. And I think in this game, what I talked about in the crossover show, was just like, can Justin Herbert carry this offense against this defense? Because going into it, the Broncos were the number one defense in the NFL. They had the most sacks in the NFL, and they had 8 takeaways over their last 2 games. They were as hot as any defense in the league. And what does Justin Herbert do? Goes out there and shuts every single hater up and does it in the most emphatic way possible. And it didn't look like it was going to be like that, right? He had a very bad interception, a very un-Justin Herbert-like interception. To think about him having back-to-back, in 2 games is hard to believe considering he had only 1 going into last week. What does he do? He throws 2 second-half touchdowns. Not only does he lead the game, the go-ahead drive, which ends up being kind of the game-winning drive in some way, but also leads the game-sealing drive and makes the game-winning play when the Chargers need it the most. And overall, it's 22 out of 30, 284 yards, 9.2 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns, a QBR of 87.4, and a passer rating of 110.1. Did it with his arm, did it with his legs. Justin Herbert is elite, and hopefully this game in prime time, doing it the way that he did, reminded those out there who have been doubting him, especially recently.
Yeah, hey, Ryan Fitzpatrick, shut your mouth. Take my quarterback's name out of your mouth from now until the end of eternity, until you're talking about him with some respect. All right? Yeah. Put some respect on Justin Herbert's name. One of the tools that Justin Herbert used to great effectiveness, and Greg Roman for that matter, is play action. According to Next Gen Stats, Justin Herbert used play action on a career-high 47.2% of his dropbacks against Denver, finishing 12 of 15 for 155 yards in this game. His ability to be able to find guys on the play action, it was massive, and it was a huge reason why Justin Herbert was primetime Herbo tonight.
Yeah, and I mean, like we talked about, it's not just getting this win. Getting the win gives you something, but it's the way you got it done, and it's the way that Justin Herbert got this one done. That throw, the go-ahead fourth quarter touchdown throw that he made to Darius Davis, as he has a defender taking him down, how he gets enough on that ball, I have no idea. It's just one of the more incredible throws that you'll ever see Justin Herbert make. He made in this game, and that was really set the tone for what that fourth quarter was going to be like. Then, obviously, gets the little kind of shovel pass to Hassan Haskins, who does the rest and puts the game away with a touchdown. I'm just so impressed with the dude, especially because we know what he looked like at the end of that last game against the Bucs. He got beat up in that first and second half, but he wasn't the same player at all in the second half. And credit to the offensive line for keeping him healthy enough in this game to be able to look like he did to go make those finishing plays in this game. But to only have 3 days of rest and have to turn around and do it against a better defense who has more sacks and gets more pressure and have to go have that daunting task on 3 days of rest, and then to go put out that performance that we saw. Don't be tricked by the numbers either. I mean, ran the ball super well. He lost 17 yards because of the way they ended up trying to, end this game and run the clock out at the end.
Killing the clock,
3 carries for negative 17 yards. If he didn't have those, it's 5 carries for 45 yards. An impact player with his legs. Spread the ball around to 10 different receivers. What else can you say? I mean, he was elite in this game, and it was so nice to see that version of Justin Herbert because we hadn't seen it in a while. We saw him with the game-winning drive against the Bengals. But to see this right now when the Chargers needed it most late in their season, David, I mean, I just don't know what else you can say about the dude.
It's clutch. This is the type of performance that Justin Herbert needed to reestablish his prominence in the NFL. This is the type of performance when in December, when the games matter, when playoff seeding is on the line, this is the performances that set you apart and put you in that upper echelon. And Justin Herbert rightly deserves to be among the best quarterbacks in the league. The Chargers are now 9-6. They sweep the Broncos for the first time since 2010, and they have a 97% chance to make the playoffs, baby. Life is good to be a Chargers fan.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
You are Locked On Bulldogs, your daily podcast on the Georgia Bulldogs.
A lot of ambiguity, I would say. And normally, like, trying to do a whole podcast on ambiguity is a pretty tough hill to climb because there's not really anything to say because, again, the situation is ambiguous unless, Clint, the ambiguity itself is a story.
See,
and
this is where it gets interesting.
I think for Georgia, as we move closer and closer, obviously college football playoff begins tomorrow. If you're listening to this on a Thursday, which is when it comes out, Indiana, Notre Dame play on Friday tomorrow.
Yeah.
Rest of the game's on Saturday. We're inching closer toward game week, which again, game week is a bit, of a stretch because we're dealing with like a 10-day window now until the game. But we're inching closer to a game week situation. Mm-hmm. And the further we move along, the more the ambiguity around the Georgia quarterback situation, I think, becomes a story. Because initially, yes, of course, all we had were rumors and reports. We had people who were kind of speculating. You had people who were coming out with, they write sources in all caps and then a colon, and then they write something, which, by the way, you should never take any of that seriously. Like if it says sources and then it says something, that is not something that you're going to want to take to the bank.
But what if I just make up a source and I don't have to say the source in order for me to hide behind a paywall and for you to give me money for me to speculate wildly about my own thoughts, Daniel?
I'm not going to name the Georgia specific site that does that.
Okay.
But chances are you probably already know it. And so you want to be careful about anything like that. And so the later we get, obviously Kirby Smart is not talking to the media. Obviously Kirby Smart, listen to me. Kirby Smart I would be shocked if he divulges any information about
you're going to get this. How's Carson Beck's injury? He's progressing. Still finding a lot. We don't know too much. Saw him around the facility today. He's getting some work in, but it's progressing.
We feel good about both guys. We feel good about our situation at quarterback.
You know what's wild about this? What's really wild about every single person that was mocking Kirby, who has said the statement, "If we needed him to go in, he could have gone in." Everybody in the world has. He
turns out we needed him to go in, and Carson Beck did go in for one play.
Like, he ain't lying.
Yeah. It's been sort of, here's the thing, Clint. It has been almost unanimously reported that Gunnar Stockton is it, right? And we're writing articles and we're publishing things and we're talking. You and I have talked on this podcast. Like, all right, well, now what does Georgia have now that we know that Gunnar Stockton is it? Which is all well and good. Because Gunnar Stockton probably is the quarterback for Georgia heading into this game.
Most likely.
But to say that that's definitive, Clint, would probably be an overreaction because I haven't heard anything definitive about Carson Beck. I haven't read any reports from a surgeon about I haven't read anything about Carson Beck and his plans to prepare for the NFL draft. I haven't read anything about what his agent is saying about a timetable for recovery to put the minds of NFL GMs at ease and let them know that his client will be ready and able to participate in drills in April, and will be ready to go through the combine, and will be ready for next August when NFL preseason rolls around. I'm not reading or hearing any of that, Clint. And if that were definitively what's happening, I would think by now I might have heard some of that.
Because you would have, exactly to your point, Carson Beck and his agent would be assuring teams today, right now, that come
It's the
camp,
guy's whole future.
he's ready to go today. Here's the plan. Surgery was successful. We're gonna have this regiment. He's working with the team still. He's in the facility. He's rehabbing with the trainers there, or he's got his own doctor in his own camp, and he's back at home in Florida. These would be the things, because the draft in injury news is not that far away, and he has a good likelihood of going somewhere to a team that needs a quarterback, or at least one that can compete. This young man owes nothing to Georgia now. If everything was done, if everything was over, he doesn't owe it to Georgia. He can be asked, but it's always been said Kirby develops guys, and he wants them to go to the NFL. It's better for Georgia. Let me tell you this right now. It's better for Georgia to have Carson Beck get highly graded and higher on the draft boards than it is for Georgia to try to keep him quiet right now. Now, can both be kind of played? Can the offense be played on both sides? Yes, it can, which is why I think we're seeing the ambiguous statements and not a lot of definitive, because I actually do truly, honestly think it's not definitive that he is for sure done for the season. Again, Carson Beck's agent would come out and say something. Not the case. Now, this is really interesting for Georgia fans outside of wanting to root for Carson Beck in the NFL, clearly because of Gunnar Stockton and what that means for Mike Bobo and he heading into these playoff matchups, and how do we prepare well for that.
TJ Watt will play against the Ravens. George Pickens will not.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast.
We now know the news, Nick. We've speculated all week. TJ Watt, no injury designation at all, which means he will play Saturday against the Baltimore Ravens in a key game that could win the AFC North for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But George Pickens will not play. He is designated as out in the Steelers injury report. Other notes here, Justin Fields also out from this game. He never even practiced this week. Deshaun Elliott was a limited participant on Thursday. He is listed as doubtful. Larry Ogunjobi limited all week with a groin injury. He is listed as questionable. Dante Jackson, also a limited participant on Thursday, also listed as questionable. So you got two maybes, a probably not, and two definitely guys definitely out. But I ask you, Nick, what will have the bigger impact on this game? The fact that TJ Watt will play, or the fact that George Pickens won't?
I think it's a good question, because I think clearly they need both these guys. Probably the two most important guys on the team, to be quite honest with you. I can make the argument that TJ playing is bigger. For one, I think they need TJ to execute the vision to stop Lamar, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think having him there is such a big part of their contain game, and not allowing Lamar just to run wild around the backfield, to step up, get scrambles everywhere, right? We've seen the Steelers have issues with that at times. But TJ is such a big part of that, kind of holding him in. And the reason that a lot of teams can't execute the Steelers' style of game plan against Lamar and the Ravens offense is because they just do not have TJ Watt. That's a big part of it. But George Pickens is so significant too. And in terms of value, I think TJ is bigger. But here's the thing. When you look at the Steelers offense without George Pickens on the field this year, Chris, it goes from what is a league average to above average offense in most metrics to one of the worst offenses in football. They're bottom five in advanced or counting metrics, whatever you want. If you want to use traditional, if you want to use more locally advanced ones now that are more modern, go for it. They are bottom five in basically all of them. So we know this, and you can watch the offense too. The eye test obviously shows that it is harder to move the ball without George Pickens. I don't think anyone is going to argue any of this. So I just don't think the Steelers have an easy button without George Pickens. I think that is significant. I think George Pickens is the easy button. Let's throw a fade to George Pickens on 3rd and 3, and he's going to make that catch, because 50-50 balls with George are 80-20 balls. And I think that is a significant issue for the Steelers. They do not have an easy button without George Pickens in there. And because they don't have George Pickens, I think it's also conversely hurt the run game. And so I think that's significant. But I also just think the Steelers kind of being able to keep the score down in this matchup is just more important anyways, because they only scored 18 points with George Pickens last time, not 6 field goals, and some of those came on short fields. So even if the Ravens turned this into a track meet and the Steelers had George Pickens, I'm not sure they would be able to keep up. The Steelers don't do well in tons of track meets. Now, they've done track meets before with the Bengals, but the Bengals' defense is the worst in the NFL. So to me, it's TJ Watt. And the reason I say that is because I think they need to keep the score down regardless of matchup, who they had. And I think he's a big part of what allows them to kind of execute their vision and slowing down Lamar.
I also think he has been big in shutting down the Ravens. I think it's important to remind people that, like, this Steelers-Ravens rivalry, whereas, yes, the Steelers have dominated the rivalry. We'll get to that later in the show. They've won 8 of the last 9 times these teams have met up. The last time the Ravens won back-to-back games was the 2019 season, when that was Mason Rudolph and Devlin Hodges in that year. But in the last stretch, in the last 8 of those 9 games, so excluding neither of these teams have eclipsed 20 points in scoring. You go back, like you said, 18-16 this year, 17-10 at the end of last year, 17-10 the other time after that, 16-13 in 2023, 16-14 the Ravens, the one Ravens win in the last 5 seasons. 16-13 Steelers in overtime, 2019 Steelers, 19-14 Steelers. You have to go back to the pick 6 Robert Spillane game against Lamar Jackson, where to see the last time that either of these teams eclipsed 20 points in scoring, when the Steelers beat them 28-24. This rivalry, Lamar Jackson or not, because I know that him not playing, he has played a factor certainly in some key games, but the Steelers have missed TJ Watt for some big games, and no one makes excuses for them. But you look at the fact that these games have been rock fights every time. George Pickens playing in several of them. It makes me think that I agree with you. I think TJ Watt being available is the bigger thing that the Steelers need. Like, if you had to choose, not that it was a Steelers choice about this happening, but if you had to choose to have one available, you take TJ Watt. And with the totality of this defense, now you do also want Deshaun Elliott, Dante Jackson to play, Logan Joby to get that more of that defensive line rotation. But TJ Watt being in, like you said, it opens up so many other things, and you have that rotation on the edge now that can help you do a lot more with TJ Watt. Alex Highsmith's in there, Nick Herbert's in there, and the way they started to use Preston Smith last week, lining him up over the middle, or 2 weeks ago, excuse me. But I think that there are a lot of good things that the Steelers defense can still do to keep this game under 20. And I think this offense, while definitely a completely different offense without George, I think they can get enough points to keep if they keep the Ravens offense from going off and having multiple really good drives and keep them down the way they have the past 8 games. I think this offense can get enough to get the job done. But again, we'll take some heavy hauling. We'll take some offensive line work. We'll take, a big step up from Pat Frymuth, Darnell Washington, a Scotty Miller, a Mike Williams. Somebody's going to need to step up in a big way. But I do think that the Steelers are built for these types of games if they keep the Ravens in check.
TJ's, and you mentioned rock fights. Well, the Steelers have turned them into rock fights. There's no guarantee it's a rock fight. I think without TJ Watt, I think the Ravens' strategy last time, the Ravens threw the ball more than they passed the ball by far in the last one. It was very clear that what the Ravens were trying to do. They tried to turn it into a track meet. The Steelers dragged them down into the mud. That was what happened in the first matchup. And that's why, the missed kicks and the unbelievable pick by Peyton Wilson, all these plays that kind of racked up, Boswell kicking 6 of 6. The Steelers just made more big plays than the Ravens did. And that's kind of been the big thing. The Ravens just haven't made big plays. Right? How many times have we seen 2-point? We've seen twice now where the Ravens could have won once and then tied the game another, where a 2-point conversion was failed and the Steelers ended up winning the game because of this. So you mentioned the 2020s. We've seen that twice now in these 9 matchups that we've talked about. And so to me, the Steelers need to be able to make this a rock fight, and I think TJ allows them to do that. I do think missing Deshaun Elliott is really going to be tough in this one. I do. I think people are underestimating just how much missing Deshaun Elliott matters. He turns them really from a great tackling team to just a good tackling team. And when they go against teams like the Eagles, who have, those shifty backs and those talents that can force missed tackles, that's tough. And the Ravens have a few guys, Justice Hill. Obviously, you don't need any endorsement from Derrick Henry, but Zay Flowers can certainly wiggle in the open field. And, they're injured too, right? Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar, and obviously Deontay Johnson's not going to play. So they're dealing with some injuries in their wide receiving room too, but Steelers are going to be able to at least have a shot at making this a rock fight. They can't keep up in a track meet. This cannot become a track meet. If it does become a track meet, I think they're in a lot of trouble. But if they could turn this into a rock fight, I do think that's where the Ravens get a little uncomfortable. I don't think the Ravens have a group on the offensive and defensive line that is super comfortable playing in rock fights. And I've seen that come up multiple times this year where they've just come close but no cigar against bigger, heavier teams. The Eagles did this to them, brought them into a rock fight. The Eagles are the best team at fighting rock fights in the NFL. They can play different styles, but the Eagles are the ultimate rock fight team and just out rock fighted the Steelers in Philly, right? That was a big difference in that game. And so really, I think if you can make this a physical game, put it down to the trenches, make every play matter, that's where the margins make sense. And I think TJ Watt allows you to do that a little more than George Pickens, even though, as we talked about, losing George Pickens is a huge loss because of what I mentioned. The bottom falls out from under the passing offense, which is significant.
It does. It really does. And also, to your point, the Ravens, they prefer the shootouts. They prefer to get their offense going. When they win, they average scoring 35 points per game, or over 35 points when you total it up. That is insane when you look at it. Like the way they played the Giants. They wanted to get the ball going there. They wanted to be able to rack up points to kind of force the Giants to have to play at their pace, because when you play at their pace, it slows them down. Their average point total when they lose is 20.4. So they haven't gotten into a boat race that they haven't won yet this year. That's what they want to get to, because they don't think that you can keep up with them. So if you're the Steelers, you need to do everything in your power to keep it that way. But you look at the teams that are good at winning the rock fights. This year, the Chiefs are one of those teams. They lost to the Chiefs. The Steelers are one of those teams. They lost to the Steelers. The Eagles are one of those teams. They lost to the Eagles. If the Steelers can keep the pace there, I think that's going to be the key for this game.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You can look at the first round of the college football playoff for that wager. None of the lines for the first rounds are particularly close, but one game has a double-digit spread. FanDuel has Texas favored over Clemson by 11.5. The Tigers have to go to Arlington for that game. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Embarrassing loss to the New York Knicks, and Cats return to Target Center.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast.
Karl-Anthony Towns returns to Target Center on Thursday night. Obviously an emotional night. Timberwolves have won 6 out of 7. The Wolves haven't played since Sunday. The Knicks haven't played since Sunday. There's so many storylines coming into this game. Such buildup. The first quarter is fantastic. It's a really fun game. High quality basketball on both ends of the floor. A little bit of a rough end to the quarter, which then kind of led us into a really kind of a snowball of a game for the Wolves. Things got out of control pretty quickly in this one in Cat's return. Ultimately, the Timberwolves end up losing by 26 points, and it really wasn't even that close. Where do you want to start with this one, Jack?
I want to start with something non-basketball related, because there are zero, and for my money, there are zero positive takeaways from this basketball game. And I will say, I was more excited to come to this game and kind of see the sights and sounds of this game than arguably almost any game we've seen this season. We've all had this game circled as Karl Anthony Towns return to Target Center. I don't think anyone really, anticipated it going anything like what we saw with Kirk Cousins when he returned to Minnesota, just because I think the ties and the relationships with Karl Anthony Towns run so much deeper, and he's just an amazing person off the court. And I think, I've gotten texts from people and had conversations with friends and even people with the Knicks of like, how do you remember Karl Anthony Towns' time as a Timberwolf? And I'll just say, first and foremost, he was just a grade A human being. And I think that's the first thing that anybody that you talk to, whether it be his former teammates, former coaches, fans, people that work in the arena, Timberwolves, front office people, other staff members on the social team, whatever it may be. And I think that just speaks volumes about it. And you saw that really stand out in the pregame warm up for Karl. Karl has traditionally always warmed up as one of the last two guys to take the floor for warm-ups. He did that during his time with the Timberwolves as well. And so there were always a lot of fans in the lower bowl watching him warm up, and he always had AirPods in, always. Last season before that, always wore AirPods while he was warming up. Tonight, he noticeably did not have AirPods in. There was a pretty large contingent of fans with signs wearing Karl Anthony Towns jerseys, all of it that were very eager to see him, that gave him a very warm reception as he stood out, as he, came back out on the floor. I don't think he was expecting that many people to be there that early, waiting to see him with showing that much love. And it was really cool to see. He wanted to hear all the things the fans were saying as he was taking his warm-up shots. He definitely did not get up as many normal warm-up shots as he would normally, because he was interacting with fans and media members. He was dapping everyone up, pointing at little, Timberwolves fans, acknowledging them, just showing everybody the love that they were showing him. And I thought it was really cool that Knicks security and team staff members essentially had to like drag him off the warm-up floor before the game, because there were so many fans that wanted an autograph, that wanted a photo, that just wanted any sense of acknowledgement. And he refused to leave the court until almost every single fan that was there had either a photo, reached out, touched hands, signed an autograph, whatever the case may be. And I think that just really speaks to Karl's character. And I thought that was a really cool moment for him to be able to have that going on while Spike Lee's sitting with his dad, watching him warm up, and his dad is taking it all in, greeting people as well. And I think that was something that was really cool, that I think I will remember for quite some time. And you saw, I tweeted out a 3-minute or so long video earlier tonight that I'd encourage people to go check out on Twitter at the handle that you see there on the screen. Just of him interacting with Ant and Rudy Gobert and Chris Hines and some of the other Timberwolves staff members. You see Ant in the video. You see Ant come and dap up Karl Sr. You see Ant and Karl take a photo with 3 or 4 young Timberwolves fans that were standing there courtside. And it was just kind of weird to see Karl in a different uniform, and really brought you back to kind of the vibe of last season. And I think that was what made last year's team so special, is that everyone was so incredibly tight-knit with one another, and they all got along great. And that really, shone through on the floor, and that it was a team that played really hard all year, that played really connected basketball. And I think Karl was at the heart of a lot of that, because you heard a lot of the ways that guys like Mike Conley and Jaden McDaniels spoke about Karl and how active he was in the group chat, and just like how, much of kind of a social maven he was. And Rudy talked about the different ways that he tried to connect with Rudy when he got traded here. They would watch, MMA fights together. They would play Call of Duty. Karl would constantly invite him over to his house to do anything. And I think, it's kind of a good segue into what we're seeing with this Timberwolves team right now, is just that there are some pretty big shoes to fill. And Karl Anthony Towns, the basketball player, has like size 19, size 20 shoes, and leaves behind a pretty huge wake. But to me, I think they miss Karl Anthony Towns, the person, and what he did in that locker room, and how he brought everybody together, and how that kind of fun-loving, infectiously positive and warm personality rubbed off on everyone and kind of helped galvanize everything. And, yes, you don't necessarily miss the crazy passes that we saw in the first quarter, the almost charges, some miscommunications with teammates trying to get rebounds, things like that. But that all pales in comparison to, I think, all the positives that he brought. And with the Timberwolves right now, I mean, we can just go to that second quarter. Naz Reid had a nice ode to Karl with 3 first quarter fouls, a couple of which were pretty head scratching. So he was sitting when he was normally in the game. And I think that kind of threw the Timberwolves rotation all out of whack a little bit. You had a lineup of Rob Dillingham, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Dante DiVincenzo, Jaden McDaniels, and Rudy Gobert in there at the start of the second quarter. And they just could not generate any sort of offense whatsoever. I think Ant exited with like 45 seconds left in the first quarter. And Randall, after a really excellent first quarter for Julius Randle, I think he had 13 points and looked like it was shaping up to be a very funny game, and that Randall's trying to spoil, Karl's return, and was playing very well. And then the train kind of came off the tracks at the end of the first quarter, had that inexplicable turnover that led to an OG Anunoby layup right before the end of the first quarter. And things just kind of spiraled from there. It was a 21-2 Knicks run that ballooned to a 26-2 run in the first 6 minutes of the second quarter. And it just kind of ended from there. And like I was saying, with Naz getting in foul trouble, kind of created some weird lineups. I think just in a way, it kind of spotlighted where this Timberwolves team has really struggled all year long with Ant off the floor, and that they just haven't been able to find enough consistent offensive creation. And especially on really the first night I can remember all year that Naz Reid's been in foul trouble, there just wasn't a whole lot there behind him, especially in the rebounding department either. And even with Gobert in there, it was just a team that was kind of getting killed on the glass and was really struggling to get rebounds in important moments. There were some back-breaking offensive rebounds that led to kick-out threes that just took the energy out of the building. And again, like I said, it was a 21-3 Knicks run in the 4 minutes that Anthony Edwards sat. But even when he returned, he was mighty passive. And he just kind of let Randall, mess around with the basketball and kind of do whatever he wanted to, and just kind of approach the game with a really lethargic energy that I think rubbed off on his teammates. And then, we've talked about the energy that Julius Randle has kind of brought to this team, and in the vibe that he has brought, which has not necessarily been, very good. I just think there was a lot of moaning and groaning from this Timberwolves crowd with each possession that the two of them kind of wasted away and didn't take control of or bring anything positive to. The Timberwolves didn't run very many plays at all. It was just kind of haphazardly bringing the ball up, setting one screen, making one pass, taking a shot, or dribbling into the lane and turning it over. The Wolves started 1 of 5 with 2 turnovers, while the Knicks are 6 of 11 with no turnovers and 3 offensive rebounds in the first couple minutes. And then, and I thought it was a lot of bad offense that fueled bad defense, where the Knicks played a lot in transition and semi-transition, and the Wolves just didn't get matched up. They couldn't get their defense set. And again, I think that a lot of that tone was being set by their 2 stars, with Ant just being passive and not playing with a whole lot of energy, and Randall just sucking the soul out of Target Center in that second quarter. I think it's a game where when you look at the box score, it doesn't really do it justice. I think you have to watch the game and really be able to hear what was going on in the arena, because fans, with every time Randall touched the ball, were just kind of groaning of like, oh boy, what's going to happen now? I mean, there was a moment in the second quarter, I believe, where Randall had a wide open kick-out pass to one of 2 guys on the wing, and the crowd is like screaming, like, these guys are wide open, like, how do you not see this? And eventually passed it when it was too late. And it's just those type of, and I think there was a tweet that Barflon Tito sent out too of Randall's off-ball defense, in transition after he missed a 3, doesn't get back and gives up a layup. I mean, it's just those types of things that the crowd notices and just takes the air out of the building. And again, I think is just the antithesis of that vibe that Karl Anthony Towns brought to the team last year. And I think, again, when Randall doesn't really fit the identity of the team, I think you can kind of make up for some of that if you're bringing a really good vibe to the team. But I just don't think he's doing that. And when neither of those things are working, especially in a year where he's an expiring contract, I just really think you start to look at how long is too long before you press that trade button, because the vibe that he is bringing is permeating through the rest of the team right now in a really unfortunate way.
Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only the incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Curation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more near you. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime.
Texas and Clemson on Saturday, marquee matchup in the college football playoffs.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In terms of the 12 team versus the 14, I think the 12 team is more where we need to be. Me personally, I had a very long standing belief that it should have been at least 14 to 16 team playoff in which every single conference champion that's inside of the RPI top 45 gets in. And then if they're outside of that, they're replaced by an at-large bid. And then you throw in a couple at-large bids outside of that. That way, nobody could say, oh, our conference got shafted, or we didn't get, or we didn't, all that type of stuff. You eliminate that. You eliminate the UCF national champions and all that by simply saying, win the football games in front of you, and you will get in, because it's tough for me to look at some of these teams and say, hey, you don't belong in, despite the fact that you had a fantastic year, because somebody just won one or two more big games than you. And it's like, well, what makes a game a big game, right? We've all seen teams in rivalry games turn into completely different teams. I'm looking at you, Ryan Day, and Ohio State. For whatever reason, they thought that they were going to be big bad Dick the Bruise up front and go ahead and run the ball. That's neither here nor there. The reality is this. I'm excited with the playoff expanding. I think it needs to expand a little further because, again, I was tired of seeing all that whining from the SEC folks, Jonathan. I know you're an SEC guy now, and I was sick and tired of seeing. Do you know that my grandmother called me up and said, grandson, you the reason my tie didn't get into the playoff? I said, Grandma, I promise you the selection committee didn't listen to me. They don't give a damn what I got to say. If I'm in that pay grade, David Locke, give me a call. We need to renegotiate some things. Okay? If Ward and them is looking at me, we need to negotiate. But in all seriousness, I'm very excited to be here, very excited to talk shop. I'm very excited about the playoff expansion because it gives us moments like this. Texas, one of the most historic brands in college football, now adds to that storied history by being one of the first teams to host a college football playoff game on campus. What a time.
Amen, brother. Amen, brother. I agree with everything you're saying, and you'll probably get your wish. We'll probably see more expansion eventually. So I want to talk to you, and I want to ask you, what is your honest assessment of this Clemson team? And let me set this up for you. What is your honest assessment of this Clemson team? Because you look at Clemson, they're in the playoffs, they're ACC champions, right? And, there's somewhat of this mystique around this team. I wouldn't say they're hot. They've only won one game in a row, but they do come in off of a championship, right? And Dabo has won a couple of national championships. And so it's like, okay, this is a team you don't want to sleep on. But we look at this Clemson team, and they lost 3 games this year. 0-2 versus the SEC. This is Texas' opportunity to prove they're a real SEC team, right? They only made the ACC championship because Miami went out there and decided to fold against Syracuse. They were up 3 scores against SMU, and they needed a last-second field goal to win it. And we know Vegas, there's a reason there's a lot of tall and pretty buildings in Vegas. Vegas has Clemson as 12-point underdogs to this Texas team. So who is Clemson? That's my question to you.
The buildings ain't the only thing tall and pretty in Vegas, but what happens there stays there. Now, with that in mind, you talk about who is Clemson. I think that Clemson is exactly who we think they are at this point. They're an uber talented but very flawed team. What do I mean by uber talented but very flawed? I would start with the quarterback position. because, I mean, hey, if anybody knows about uber talented but very flawed at that position, congratulations, Texas. You know, you get me. You get me. We're right here. So I believe you start with Cade Klubnik, who he is vanilla Vic on paper. He can run. He can sling it. He can do everything that you need him to do on paper. He has a cannon for an arm. His decision-making at times this year looked like it clicked. It looked like, oh, he got it now. It's like Lethal Shooter when he missed that first one to say that, I understand it now. You thought that Cade Klubnik had that moment this year, and then down the stretch, the wheels just kind of fell off. So I look at him as a microcosm of this team because they can run the ball very effectively with Phil Maffa and company in that backfield. But now you get Phil Maffa banged up. The offensive line finally gets it together, and they look good for spurts, especially to start off that SMU game. They look good after being dominated by South Carolina up front. They say, hey, we're still here. We still got a squad. And then what happens to them? Oh, man, down the stretch, they could not run the ball to put away that game to save their life. It wasn't even like SMU had to bring in 8-9-man boxes to stop the run. They were doing it with very light boxes. So I look at this thing and I say, Clemson is a team that when they are firing at their highest clip, they are. To say that they're dangerous is an understatement. They can play with anybody. The problem is they're not always firing at their highest clip. They're like that old school car that you got where sometimes the pistons misfire. You hear that real loud pop, 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 because you know that car ain't going nowhere no matter how hard you mash on the gas. That's who Clemson is this year. And the hope for the ACC, the hope for the Clemson faithful is that you see the best version of Clemson, because I think if Clemson plays their best game, Texas plays their best game, I think Clemson could beat them. The only problem with that is Clemson playing their best game is few and far in between. And if you get Clemson down, they have a tendency to kind of go into a shell. They have a tendency to kind of struggle to get back out in front of that thing. So I look at this Clemson team and I say defensively, they are who they always were to some extent. Obviously, Brent Venables is 1-on-1 when it comes to calling the defense. I think that he should have been the Bud Foster of the 2010s and beyond. And he should have stayed with Dabo forever. Now, both of them struggling separately, but that's another story for another time. So you look at this situation and you say, Clemson, again, defensively, uber talented. They've got guys everywhere. It's going to be a struggle to kind of move the ball against them in certain ways, especially because Texas relies heavily on that run game. And the running against Clemson, that's not exactly the easiest task there is. But on the flip side of that, Clemson has shown an inability to push the ball downfield. And if teams crowd that box, if teams say, you know what, sure, we'll let Cade get his on the ground here and there, but you're going to have to beat us with all of this pressure up in the box. You're going to have to hit those deep shots on the outside. You're going to have to find Williams. Brown's been hurt all year. What's he going to do? Wesco's a true freshman. Does he know the playbook? Brennan Stool, he's a good tight end. He doesn't appear great, though. He doesn't feel like he's taking that next step. What are you going to do then? So Clemson is a good team. Again, at their peak, borderline very good. They're just very flawed.
Yeah, it seems like a very high ceiling, but also a very low floor. And, we'll just have to see what happens on Saturday. I do want to ask you, you football savant, right? And so you're handling NC State, you're handling the ACC, but obviously you're a college football fan. So you've seen a little bit of the Texas Longhorns this year, I believe. You've seen a little bit of them. So from an outsider perspective, just really quickly, what do you think about this Texas team, right? Because there's a lot of people screaming that they're not battle tested. There's a lot of people screaming they haven't beat anybody. There's a lot of people screaming they could be frauds. They could be fake demons. Quit kidding. You know what I'm saying? So what do you think about this Texas team?
I mean, here's the thing, right? I think if you're comparing them to great teams, absolutely, this team is fraudulent. But again, if you're talking about that very good type of area, they're absolutely there. Can they push for great when they're firing at their highest clip? Absolutely. But I say they're basically the antithesis of Clemson because they've shown up when it mattered almost every time. They just have moments where it was just like, what's going on? What's happening here? You know what I mean? They're seeing that same type of structure with Quinn Ewers was the highest rated quarterback ever coming out of high school. It wasn't like the best in the last 5 years, the best in the last 10 years. Oh, he's the best in this class. He was the highest rate across the board. Everybody who saw the young man play said, oh, he's it. I don't know what it is until I saw him. It's like the difference between when you met that girl you liked a lot versus when you met your wife. And the world changed. That's what everybody thought Quinn Ewers was. Turns out, that just wasn't the case. And so you think to yourself, well, wow, this Texas team must be disappointing. But disappointing by what standard? This is a 2-loss team, or actually a 3-loss team, including the SEC championship, or 2?
No, 2. Just their 2 losses both to Georgia.
So 2 losses both to Georgia. And yes, you can say, hey, that was a little bit embarrassing losing to a guy that didn't have his arm. We very clearly know this young man, they moved his right arm, and the linebackers are still sitting there buzzing like, where's the ball going to go? I wonder. But in all seriousness, this Texas team is one that, some people weren't as high on after losing as much talent as they did last year. But there was a reason why nationally they were still receiving a lot of respect. And the defense, to me, is the surprise. They're the best kept secret in America, in my opinion, because this defense has been the stars of the show. This defense has been the most consistent unit. And you think to yourself, oh, they losing Big Sweat and his running partner. They're going to be very liable, very shaky against the run, and yet that hasn't been the case. You think to yourself, oh, they're losing a lot of senior experience on that defense. They're going to be, they're going to be more pliable than they were last year. Well, I don't know about y'all, but I haven't seen anybody put up 40, 50 points against this team. So with that in mind, I very seriously look at this Texas team and I say, the defense is the best kept secret. Everybody knows about the Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers thing. And if you got 2 quarterbacks, you got none. I understand that. But in all seriousness, this Texas running game and defense have done more than enough to convince me, hey, this team is for real. Would I compare this team to like the USC teams that had Reggie Bush and Vince Young? No. Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart? No. Would I compare it to the Vince Young team that beat them, where you couldn't throw a rock in that Texas huddle without hitting a future Pro Bowler? Absolutely not. Would I compare him to, what Washington was last year? Yeah, I could compare him to that. I could say comfortably, hey, this team would give that team problems. Would I compare him to, hell, even what a Michigan was last year? Absolutely. I think this team certainly is in that type of vein. But again, I just think that if your expectation was this will be one of the best teams of all time, you're a little delusional, number one. Stop. Hey, I don't know if they allow liquor in DKR, but stop drinking it. And number 2, if you believe that this team is good for where they are and they have a chance to make a run deep in these playoffs, I think that that's completely reasonable.
Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You can look at the first round of the college football playoff for that wager. None of the lines for the first rounds are particularly close, but one game has a double-digit spread. FanDuel has Texas favored over Clemson by 11.5. The Tigers have to go to Arlington for that game. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
It's Tennessee, Ohio State. The college football playoffs are here.
You are Locked On Balls, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers.
Tennessee, Ohio State, it starts tomorrow. 2 teams that don't play each other very often, hardly at all. We know that. Maybe that's going to change in the conference expansion and college football playoff era, the 12 teams. I mean, here we are, year number 1, and Tennessee and Ohio State are going to play each other. But listen, I mean, I was raised to hate Ohio State, right? I mean, I was raised here in an East Tennessee household. My dad's a big-time Tennessee fan. My grandfather's a big-time Tennessee fan. Grew up hating Alabama, hating Florida, hating Georgia. I mean, hating anybody Tennessee plays, but you didn't like Alabama. You didn't like Florida. Those were the big 2. But also, we just be watching college football on a random Saturday, and Ohio State will be on the field, and my dad will turn the channel like, I hate Ohio State. Can't stand Ohio State. Why? I just can't stand Ohio State. Don't like Ohio State. Like, all right, same thing with Miami. Oh, I can't stand Miami. Don't like Miami. There was a national championship one time. I forgot the year. Somebody in the comments will be sure to tell me. I know. But there was Ohio State versus Miami, and Dad was like, I can't even just watch this game. It's just awful. So there's always been that disdain for the Buckeyes, at least for me, right? And I don't know if that's the case for you guys as well. It's kind of like Duke in not the same situation, don't get me wrong, but like everybody kind of hates Duke in college basketball, kind of hates Duke. I kind of equate this like to Ohio State or Notre Dame would be the accurate assumption there or comparison there for Duke, but in football terms. But nonetheless, there's just not a whole lot of like there for the Ohio State, right? I'm mocking that for sure. So I'm intrigued to see how this game goes. I'm super pumped to see the environment. I'm super pumped as my alarm just goes right here. Apologies. I'm super pumped to see this environment. I'm super pumped to see how Tennessee goes about navigating this really, really tough defense. We talked about it all week long. I've said the keys and what needs to happen. But here's another one that I don't think I've mentioned a couple times. I don't think I've mentioned much this week, and I don't know why. I've written about it. I don't know why I've mentioned it on here. Vols win if fill in the blank, and more than getting pressure on the quarterback, more than running the football, more than mixing things up on defense, more than being effective, in the run game, all that and more. More than that, Vols win if you win the red zone. Old coach said it at the general's quarters, and I couldn't agree more because again, I've already been talking about it and writing about it. You have Ohio State that of all the 12 playoff teams, number one in offensive efficiency. Once you get in the red zone on offense, they're also like number 2 in defensive efficiency, I do believe. I'm going to go pull up that stat real quick to make sure that it is what it is. Stat roundup. Here we go. Ohio State scoring touchdowns in the red zone, second among all playoff teams at 77.5%, meaning when you get inside the red zone, they're scoring touchdowns on 77.5% of the time, second among the college football playoff teams. Defensively, okay, they are holding opponents in the red zone. They're keeping opponents out of the end zone in the red zone 34.4% of trips. That is number 1 in college football playoffs. That is a really, really good stat. So offensively and defensively, Ohio State has been phenomenal in terms of touchdown percentages in the red zone. Tennessee, we know defensively, Tennessee's been good. Tennessee is allowing opponents when they reach the red zone 44.1% of the time into the end zone. That's a really, really good number. It's almost 10 more. It is 10 more than what Ohio State is allowing, but that 44.1%, good enough for second among playoff teams. So Tennessee defensively is really, really good. Offensively, it's a different story. We know that. Tennessee is scoring touchdowns in the red zone offensively 61.6% of the time, settling for field goals a lot, turning the football over too much, turning it over on downs as well. Tennessee's got to be better in that. So who has the edge on paper in terms of red zone efficiency? You would say probably Ohio State. But Tennessee, at least defensively, is right there. Who wins the red zone? Defensively, can you keep Ohio State out of the red zone more? Can you force field goals, which they're kind of in flux right now in terms of field goal kicking? They're not really sure who their field goal kicker is. Can you keep them in flux? Can you force them to attempt field goal tries and keep it out of the end zone? Tennessee, meanwhile, run Nico. Use him as a weapon inside the 20-yard line. You did it against Iowa. I think Iowa's defense last year is very comparable to what Ohio State is this year. I think Ohio State's probably better, but I think it's comparable. And Tennessee was able to use Nico in the run game and win that. Plus, Josh Heupel and Joey Halsey have had 3 weeks to kind of come up with some schemes and wrinkles and everything. I got faith in those guys. I do. Tennessee wins this football game if, again, along with winning the line of scrimmage, pressuring the quarterback, running the football, slowing down the receivers for Ohio State, Tennessee wins this football game if you win the red zone. And that, I think, is one of the biggest focal points in this football game.